Hello there, coming to you from the bunker. This is episode 36 of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. Montana, a state that has already been the scene for considerable legal drama as Watchtower fights for its perceived right to cover up child sex abuse, is the centre of attention once more. Not only has the previous case involving Maximo Reyes been resurrected under a whole new lawsuit, but two new lawsuits have been filed against Watchtower in the district court involving what has been described as a ring of pedophiles that abused countless children in Hardin, Montana during the 1970s and 1980s. Here to help me understand these latest developments are my regular co-hosts, Mark O'Donnell and Covert Fade. Mark and Covert, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to see you, Lloyd. Unfortunately, we're always talking about these cases of abuse, and it's hard to smile about it, but I'm glad you're covering it, and good to see you. Good to see you too, Covert.
And welcome, Covert, as well.
Yeah, welcome, guys. Good to be back on. Yeah, I know what you mean, Mark. Hopefully at some point soon, Tony Morris will do something stupid in public again, and we'll have something a bit funnier to talk about. But
I would quite happily do the light-hearted stories all day long. I think I speak for all of us in saying that these stories really eat at our souls. We really do not want these stories to be as bad as they are, or to exist at all. But they do exist, and we need to talk about them. And Mark, you've been to Montana for the Maximo Reyes lawsuit that was overthrown on appeal, and again has now been refiled under different laws. We can go into all of that again later on in the show. But can you just give us some kind of idea of what we're dealing with here? Because a pedophile ring involving, I think it's ministerial servants and elders. We've not seen this before, have we?
Well, the closest thing that we've come to talking about a pedophile ring is when we discussed the Palmer leaks. And we had to be very sensitive about the Palmer leaks because those documents came out of Massachusetts, and they did involve several individuals who were alleged pedophiles. And there were several victims. So in the course of investigating that case myself, I know that the victims themselves described it as a pedophile ring because there were multiple people involved. And in fact, there was some allegation that there was a police cover-up because apparently some police were friends with local priest, and there was actually a priest involved in this abuse. This is up in the Northeast, like Maine and Massachusetts. So that was really, in that case is ongoing, by the way, and it's under investigation.
Sorry,
so
did you say a priest was involved in the pedophile ring of Jehovah's Witnesses in Massachusetts?
Yeah, and just so the viewers are clear, we're not talking about what we're going to talk about today. This was related to the Palmer leaks. One of the victims has stated that her own father was afraid to go to the local authorities in that state. And I'm not going to name the particular state. I don't want to give too much because, as I said, there is a police investigation ongoing. But one of the victims did state that there was a connection and that her father didn't want to go to the local law enforcement in her state because according to her father, who wanted to report her abuse to the police, the local, one of the local or more than one of the local police members of the police force were directly connected to this alleged pedophile ring. So in other words, they were afraid of retribution or a cover-up by even the police. This is something that we see more in allegations with the Catholic Church. For example, those who watched the Keepers documentary, which was filmed in Baltimore, and that involved a murder, 2 murders. It involved the Catholic Church and a huge, massive cover-up that didn't get exposed for decades. Well, those cases were very serious because the Catholic Church in Baltimore and in many cities is very closely connected to law enforcement, in that many of the priests are very close with law enforcement officials. So there were allegations that the police covered this up. So the Palmer leaks, we start to see a little bit of evidence of that in what I just described. But I guess the 4 words that I would throw out there right now with this new Montana, these 2 new Montana cases, is here we go again. And as you said, Lloyd, it's not often that we hear about an alleged pedophile ring within the Jehovah's Witness community. The allegations are not being made that Watchtower initiated this pedophile ring. And I want to make that clear because I've heard people say things like, satanic cult ritual abuse and Watchtower's part of, some sort of grand conspiracy. That's not what this is about. What this is about is that there was a pedophile ring and that it was covered up by local elders who were actually involved in the child abuse itself, which we'll describe in not too graphic terms. It's very graphic. But more importantly, it's the cover up by the Watchtower organization. The fact that these crimes took place in the 1970s and 80s at a time when there was mandatory reporting. And I want to get into this a little bit later and get you guys your thoughts on this, but there was mandatory reporting back then, but it didn't include clergy. But the way the language was written is that anyone who became aware of child sexual abuse was obligated to report, including teachers and doctors. So it wasn't until 1991 that Montana came up with new legislation that added clergy to the list of people who must report. And it received such an objection by the churches in Montana, like Catholic Church and other church groups, that they forced this added language in there, which said, it was the clergy penitent exemption language, which said basically that, well, if it was during the course of a confession that a priest or a clergyman learned of child sexual abuse, then that's covered by clergy penitent confidentiality, such as a confession by someone like Maximo Reyes. So that was 1991. And that little tiny bit of extra language that was added because the churches objected, that is what ended up causing the reversal of Montana's decision, which granted, the 2 ladies, it granted the one woman, Lexi Nunez, who was and she's out in the open about this, so she's willing to talk about it. But Lexi was awarded $35 million. And then the Supreme Court looked at the case a year later and said, look, unfortunately, this victim or the elders in this case were covered by clergy penitent privilege, which other states disagree with. So I want to make that clear. This is not a broad scale decision. Watchtower has lost many cases, such as in California, where they did not get awarded this clergy penitent privilege exemption. So I don't want to get too off track, but we've got Montana is just an absolutely beautiful place. It's a place where you think you'd want to raise your children. In fact, during the Lexi Nunez or Max Reyes abuser trial, they interviewed the jury as they were doing jury selection. And I remember them asking this one potential juror as they were doing their voir dire process, why did you come to Montana? And he said, well, it's to get away from this kind of abuse. It's just, an incredibly beautiful, broad place to live. But there's a very seedy underbelly when you have insular organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses. Many of them are quite fine people. But when you have church elders combined with sexual abuse, combined with we keep this internal within our organization, we will handle this matter according to our judicial rules and we will not report to the authorities, then you have a recipe for disaster.
Well, the first Montana case was outrageous and shocking enough. I mean, we're talking about a clear-cut case of Watchtower facilitating abuse by making sure that the authorities were kept out of the picture, so that Holly's abuse went unreported and Maximo Reyes could go on to abuse Lexi. That story was horrifying enough, but we're now learning about a ring of pedophiles, correct me if I'm wrong, involving elders and ministerial servants. And I take your point that we're in no way suggesting that this was a Watchtower-sponsored or Watchtower-coordinated ring. All Watchtower had to do, as far as we're concerned, is cover up the abuse, which apparently they did. So how on earth could you have this situation where you have elders and ministerial servants working together in a coordinated operation to molest children?
So that brings us to the allegations. And I think this is a good point to state that these are just allegations. So number one, I want to set the ground rules here is that we're going to do everything possible to not name any of the victims of this abuse. Now, these are public documents. However, we at JW Survey are not going to be publishing the documents until they're fully redacted, and that takes some time because, look, we don't want to embarrass any of the victims. They've been through enough already, and it is journalistic practice for any good journalistic organization to not name victims of abuse unless those victims wish to be named or wish to come forward. And Lexi and Holly were very good about that. They were, they want their name known, and they wanted people to know what happened. So that being said, so we'll set those ground rules. And, if we slip up, it can be edited out. But they are public documents. There are two cases. The first case was filed about 2 weeks ago. We call it the Kakert case. It's Kakert and Mapley versus Watchtower. So to set the stage here, what's really going on is that you have a total of 4 women that have brought 2 cases. The first case is the Kakert and Mapley case. And this involves 2 daughters of Bruce Mapley Sr. Who have come forward, and they have said that their father, as well as a ministerial servant named Gunnar Haynes, and by the way, both men were ministerial servants. So they were appointed by Watchtower, by the governing body, approved those appointments. So the first claims they made is that these 2 men, Bruce Mapley Sr. and Gunnar Haynes, both sexually molested them for a period of time when they were children over a course of several years. So this is the Kakert case. Now, in the Kakert case, what has happened is that not only have the 2 women come forward after all of these years, and I want to interject one thing. Our viewers are probably saying, why are they coming forward now? Well, thanks to Montana's statute of limitations legislation that was just passed about a year or so ago, the governor of Montana signed legislation that allowed a statute of limitations extension, or a window for 1 year. And that window ran from May of last year. It ended May 6th. So what is today, the 13th, as we're recording on the 13th. So that window just ended about a week ago. And these 2 cases were filed just before that window ended. What that means is that any victims of abuse, doesn't matter, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholic, whatever, have an opportunity to file their cases that were previously barred from being filed in Montana. Because remember, we have these problems with statute of limitations. Once that runs out, and every state's a little bit different, once that runs out, you can't file your case. So Montana has said, okay, we're opening the window for a year. And so all of these people have come forward. Multiple women accusing multiple Jehovah's Witness elders. And in the Kakert case, you have first 2 daughters that have come forward accusing not only their father, but they've accused this other ministerial servant and this other elder and multiple other elders of abuse. Then we have some substantiation here of these allegations in that the former wife of Bruce Mapley Sr. has come forward in an affidavit and stated that, yes, this abuse absolutely happened, that her husband was a pedophile, that she tried and couldn't do anything about it. This is one of the problems we have with Jehovah's Witness cases, is that women are often treated, subserviently. They have to be subservient to the men and told by the men of the congregation as well as their husband to keep your mouth shut, or they risk everything. They risk, losing their home, their marriage, if they don't have work, they're reliant upon their husband. So this is why mandatory reporting is so important. So all these years later, Shirley Gibson comes forward about her ex-husband and says, yes, it's all true. And I tried to do something about it, but I couldn't. The elders told me. She even went to the elders about her own husband and about this man, Gunnar Haynes, who allegedly also abused her daughters.
And these were ministerial servants, just to be clear.
That is correct. That is correct. To be clear, so she went to both. She then went to the elders and told them what the allegations were, and they said this is going to be handled internally. So then we have another man that comes forward who is a former elder in the Hardin Montana congregation named James Rowland. So he writes an affidavit and puts it on both of these new Montana cases, attaches it to them. So he comes forward and says even more information. So he also accuses Gunnar Haynes and an additional elder named Harold Rimby and Bruce Mapley Sr. and another elder named Martin Svensson of sexual abuse of not just these two women in the first case, but of his 3 daughters. So here's where he comes to the presiding overseer of the congregation, Martin Svensson, who, according to the reports I've read and the notes I've read, was a very powerful man in the congregation. He was sort of the head honcho elder. And
what has prompted this former elder, James Rowland, to be so open about? Is he no longer a believing Jehovah's Witness?
Correct. So,
Right.
And that's really part of the story. And in fact, I'm going to get into that very briefly when we get to the second case, because in the first case, he provides an affidavit and he blows all this open and makes these allegations and says that it was all covered up. So then he says, let me check my notes here. So he actually claims to have approached 2 different traveling overseers or circuit overseers about the problem. He was very upset that he found out that his own daughters were molested, but then he found out all these other people were molested in the congregation. Then he finds out that the presiding overseer himself, Martin Svensson, was sexually abusing children. And there's some
am I right in saying that this Martin Svensson character was approached about the actions of the ministerial servants, but
Correct.
He was himself involved in this ring when he was approached?
That's exactly right. So he was approached, and obviously you have a conflict of interest when he finds out about some of his, co-ministerial servants / elders abusing kids, and when he himself...
Why would he go after them when he's involved in exactly the same thing? Yeah.
Big conflict of interest there. So you have all these people, the victims can't do anything about it. The wives are afraid, like, Mapley's ex-wife what is she going to do? And it's a very tenuous situation. So what happened then was Rowland claims that in 1988 or 1989, he went to his first traveling overseer and described the problem. And, he was scolded severely by the circuit overseer. And according to his claim, he was told to never, ever bring up the subject of pedophilia again. Then what happened was, because he kept making these claims about pedophilia in the congregation or child abuse in the congregation, another traveling overseer came and removed him as elder. So he was deleted, and he was fed up and he left the religion. So this is happening in the late 80s, early 90s. He leaves the religion. He's disgusted. He found out that his 3 daughters were molested. And so here we come to the second case. So right before the May 6th deadline, just a few days before, 2 of the 3 Rowland daughters come forward and allege that all of this is true. And then they start talking about even more that went on with more perpetrators of abuse. So they start.
Are you able to? I know I hate to put you on the spot like this.
Yeah.
But are you able to give some kind of ballpark of how many perpetrators there were in this ring in Hardin congregation, and how many victims there were.
And I just want to, once again, I can't say it enough. These are alleged victims.
Yeah.
I can't say that, any of these men have been arrested, or women, by the way. Their alleged wives were involved. So I'll just go down the list of the allegations in the documents here. So in the Rowland case, we have, let's actually go back to the first case. We have the Cakard case, where we have Bruce Mapley Sr., that's one, Gunnar Haynes. We have Martin Svensson was named, Harold Rimby, so that's 4. Then we come into the Rowland case, and then we have Quentin and Nellie Means, who are the grandparents of these 2 additional women that have come forward. So what's that, 6? Quentin Means was an elder. So that's at least 6 we have there. Then these 2 women accused Elder Jim Warnock of sexually abusing the first victim after she walked in on him abusing his own daughters. So that's 7. We already mentioned Elder Martin Svensson was on the list. Then we have a Gary Baker was accused. I think that's 8. Then we have a Jay Donovan, another elder accused. Dale Hebert. Let's see. I'm not sure. What are we up to? 10. And another one named Bill O'Neill.
I'm at this point, I'm wondering if there was anyone in the congregation who was an elder or servant who wasn't a pedophile. I mean, we're talking about enough elders and servants to run a congregation.
Yeah, and of course this happened over a period of time, and I don't know how many moved in and out of the congregation or how many were permanent.
Okay.
These cases have just been filed, so there may be amended complaints where we find out more, and we're probably going to see more depositions take place.
But maybe we can bring Covert in here. I just struggle to wrap my head around how you can have such a sophisticated circle of evil perpetuating this horrific crime on such a coordinated scale, and at no point does anyone's conscience prick. At no point does anyone think this goes entirely against the religion that we're pretending to be members of.
Yeah, it struck me when I was reading this, it's like, that's a lot of abusers to have in one congregation. But then I started thinking, if the congregation is essentially controlled, if there is a significant portion of elders and ministerial servants who are abusers, you almost wonder if there was some kind of, I'm trying to think of the right kind of very hidden hush-hush message that went out to other people, other abusers they knew of in other congregations, to say, hey, we own this place. You can come here and it's safe. I mean, that's complete speculation on my part.
Like a hunting ground almost.
Yeah. I mean, this is complete speculation. It might not even be that. And I'm sure that there are psychologists who can sit down and say, well, actually what happens is you get some abusers will groom other people into abusing, and this thing has happened before. But it seems, I was going to say, it's astonishing to see this, because there are, mind you, I think they worked out in the Australian Royal Commission that the victim numbers divided by the numbers of predators, it was the number of abusers recorded divided by the number of congregations, meant that every single Australian congregation had at least one abuser, and many of them must have had 2. And you wonder if there's just maybe something happened in this area that meant that some people felt safe and other people knew they could go there and kind of have shelter for what they were doing. That's the only thing I can think of. It's just, in terms of the scale, it's just one of the worst things I've ever heard of in the JW sense. Because as you said, Mark, we had the Palmer leaks, which were indicated a kind of multiple people involved. But since then, this is probably the biggest, something you could legitimately describe as a pedophile ring operating inside of and in control of a congregation. And it's just incredible.
I mean, we've covered the Roderick Watkins story, and that was pretty horrific. And, we alluded earlier to the ring or alleged ring in Massachusetts. I'm struggling to think of a worse story. If you're going to make a film about the worst case scenario when it comes to what Watchtower's cover-up of abuse can produce, you'd surely pick this as the absolute worst case scenario. And who knows whether there are worse stories still that just haven't come to light yet because of various issues involving statute of limitation.
Yeah.
When you examine these cases, these details that we see here do not seem unusual for cases of multiple child abuse and pedophilia within small circles. It's almost infectious that when you have, let's say, an elder or ministerial servant who's getting away with something and another one finds out, and then the standards kind of get looser and looser, and there is this cycle of sexual perversions that occur with children, which are crimes. But then there's this forgiveness that occurs. And so this is one of the elements of this case where it was brought to the attention of the elders in the case of Bruce. Let's see. The documents state that Gunnar Haynes was sanctioned by the church, either by being reproved or disfellowshipped. And the reason I say either one is that it's not clear at this point. I think they're still trying to locate documents. I don't have the S-77 form. We have the ex-wife who implied that Gunnar Haynes was disfellowshipped, but then immediately brought back into the congregation because she uses the term reinstated. But she didn't use the term disfellowshipped. She sort of implied serious reproof, but then she said that he was reinstated. So that implies that he may have been disfellowshipped for a short period of time. But all of these other men got away with it, most likely because of this two-witness rule and the fact that they told everyone to hush up about it.
Just on this whole issue of covering up, because usually when we're covering a story like this, where abuse gets covered up, where the elders find out about it and they approach Watchtower and Watchtower says, don't go to the authorities or whatever. What you need in order for there to be a cover-up that Watchtower is culpable for is quote-unquote clean elders. I'm wondering whether Watchtower could try invoking the whole bad apples thing, where they can just point their finger at more or less the whole congregation in Hardin and say, has nothing to do with us because everyone who could do something about it locally was in on it. So were there any quote-unquote clean elders who knew about what was happening, went to Watchtower and received their instructions to cover things up?
Well, this is where you get the allegations against several circuit overseers. And I believe that between the two cases, at least two were named. For example, I'll read this statement. This is from the Rowland case, the second case. It says, in or around 1987, victim number 2 disclosed the sexual abuse she had been suffering at the hands of the church's elders to a circuit overseer named Brother Polkowski.
Right.
So here we have a named circuit overseer. There was another circuit overseer that was named in the Cakert case. And there was even a third one that Mr. James Rowland, the former elder, could not remember the name of that circuit overseer. And that's not unusual because we all know that COs come and go. It's a 2-year cycle generally, and you have lots of COs come and go. But what I find interesting is that you have so many COs mentioned, and Rowland's claim is that he went to those COs and they told him to hush up about it. Well, the circuit overseer is a direct representative of the governing body. These are the men that we've seen named in documents that, the governing body works obviously through branch committees, but their first control, their first representative underneath of them, besides the local branch committees, are the circuit overseers, and those circuit overseers handle basically the business of all of these congregations.
Well, they receive their appointment from the governing body, circuit overseers.
Directly.
Yeah.
And they are in the documents that we have show that the circuit overseers also receive notification whenever there is an allegation of child sexual abuse or a judicial committee that occurs, right, where a person is accused of or disfellowshipped for child abuse. The CO is generally copied on that. And you could probably comment on that, because I think you've investigated that a little bit on your end in as far as the English investigation.
Well, I mean, because obviously I've been doing lots of research for ICSA, and without wanting to kind of divulge anything confidential, I have obviously been familiarizing myself with what the process is, going through the Shepherd book, going through the Circus Overseers guidelines. And yeah, circus overseers are deeply involved. Whenever there is any allegation of child sex abuse, the CO is involved. It's all there in black and white. So you raise a good point, because I'm just trying to kind of go one or two steps ahead and think, what's Watchtower's excuse going to be?
Sure, play the devil's advocate.
Watchtower would probably just say, oh, well, it's a nightmare congregation. We want to wash our hands of it. But they can't wash their hands of it if the circuit overseers were apprised of the situation, so that they could then report to Watchtower, so that Watchtower knew what was going on, and we're only finding out about it decades later due to a window in the statute of limitations law.
And imagine, additionally, I was thinking about this, imagine what would have happened if the accusation that came to the circuit overseer and then went up to Watchtower was not there are a group of elders and ministerial servants abusing children, but there are a group of elders and ministerial servants who believe in evolution.
Yeah.
They couldn't have acted fast enough.
Yeah.
Or a group of elders and ministerial servants who are stealing money out of Watchtower's accounts.
Imagine you have Richard Dawkins' ring of pro-evolutionists. That thing is going to get broken up quickly, you know? Yeah. But pedophilia, were there two witnesses, you know?
And sadly, what it comes down to in many cases is the fact that the brakes are put on whenever these allegations hit the elders and then hit Watchtower and the Watchtower Service Department and Legal Department, not only for the reporting part of it, but for the question of whether or not the victims in this case were willing participants. And so we know from Watchtower's own database and documents from that database that whenever there is an allegation against a perpetrator, they categorize not just they database not only the perpetrators or alleged perpetrators, but they keep a detailed database of the alleged victims. And part of that process is where the elders have to inform Watchtower of whether or not the children that have come forward, whether they're 8, 10, 12, 16 years of age, are willing participants.
The phrase willing participants appears, I think, at least 2 times in chapter 14 in the Shepherd book, the chapter dealing with child sex abuse.
This is really a problem, Lloyd, and it's going to get them in, and it's already gotten them in serious problem, but it's only going to get worse because they put the brakes on and say, well, is this person a willing participant? They're guilty in this. It's not really as much abuse as it was a consensual relationship. We know this from some of Erwin's Zalkin's new cases. For example, the gentleman Michael that came forward and did a press conference with Erwin. That's what they did to him. He was abused for years by this man, this Jehovah's Witness. I don't recall if he was the elder or servant. Just escaping me now. There's so many cases, but he was abused for years. And what did Watchtower do? Instruct those elders to disfellowship him as a willing participant in homosexual acts. So they basically said, you're a homosexual, you're part of it. Meanwhile, this man's life was ruined. So
yeah, and it illustrates an additional problem that seeps through all of these cases is you're not just dealing with people who are trying to evade legal reporting for reasons of trying to duck personal guilt or legal accountability. This is all getting filtered through a lens of extreme religious fundamentalism, which doesn't, through the Watchtower lens, which doesn't understand that a child cannot consent to be abused, and that wants to find out, well, is this child also, say, a homosexual? Should we punish their sin as well? This is this whole kind of cultural aspect, which wraps up so much of the issue regarding the way that the Watchtower deals with these abuse cases, which is often baffling to people who are maybe coming to this from the legal profession or journalistic profession. And it's to the credit of a lot of lawyers and judges and journalists who sit down and actually learn how the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses works, and then start to understand, this is why we've got this one of the key drivers in why this problem is so strange and won't go away, is because you have this fundamentalist, fanatical religious attitude towards issues of sex that sometimes is much more interesting in punishing a child for a perceived sin than it is in reporting the abuser to the police to protect other children.
Very true.
What I'd like to do is, just because for my own therapy and catharsis, is to switch to the news shortly. But I'm wondering, before we do that, because you were mentioning before, Mark, that we are not showing the documents at this time because they haven't been fully redacted yet. But there are some documents that we were thinking of showing, just to kind of raise a flag on this story, and show, because I'm mindful as well that there may be, believing Jehovah's Witnesses watching this who are fairly new to the whole thing, and they could easily conclude that we're just making all of this up. But if we could at least show a couple of images with the bare bones of this case there, which I think you already posted on social media, that might just be helpful.
Right. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to bring up on the screen just a couple of sections that do not name the victims themselves, but they name the allegations against the perpetrators. And what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to see if the ones that I have contain the statement. There was just a horrific statement that was made about what was going on in Martin Svensson's home. So what I'll do, let me just bring up what I have, and I'll skim through it, and then we can talk about that and get to the news. So let's see what we've got here. And you gentlemen can let me know if you can see that.
Yeah, we can see it.
So what we've got here is one of the two cases that we have. The allegations are listed in numerical order. So this one starts at number 32. And before that, you have all the different things, statements of fact about, Watchtower, Pennsylvania, Watchtower, New York, etc. Then it gets down to the case itself. So item number 33, for example, and this is, I believe, from the Rowland case. It says Quentin Means was an elder of the Hardin congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. Gunnar Haynes and his first wife, Joyce, began sexually abusing victim number 1 around 1983 when she was 5 years old, continued until around 1988, and then began abusing victim number 2 around 1984 until around 1986. Then I'm going to jump down to number 36. Gunnar Haynes was a ministerial servant in the Hardin congregation. Number 37, Jim Warnock sexually abused victim 1 in and around 1983 when she was 5 years old, after she walked in on him abusing his own daughters. 38, Warnock was an elder in the Hardin congregation. Then we have 39, Martin Svensson, who was an elder, and his wife, Millie, began sexually abusing victim number 1 around 1986 when she was 8 years old and continued until around 1988. So that was 3 years. These are some of the perpetrators. And then if you can see on screen, I have number 40. So again, this is going back to Martin Svensson and his wife, and these are allegations that they began sexually abusing victim number 2 in or around 1977.
Let's not read necessarily the whole part about ritualistic torture. I mean,
right.
That's there for people to read if they want to.
Correct.
But can we just kind of note that point 43 involving Martin Svensson, who was an elder, describes a new house being built with a room in the basement dedicated to sexually abusing children. So an elder builds a house and envisions in building the house, well, I need somewhere to abuse children. Am I reading this correctly?
You are. And what I'll do is I'm going to pull this off of share right now, and I'm sure you'll be able to edit that in. So yes, you are correct, Lloyd, that the allegation here, as shocking as it may sound, is that this man, Martin Svensson, not only was the presiding elder in his congregation, but that he and his wife both abused multiple victims inside a house that they built with a room dedicated to abusing children. Now, in their basement. Now, I don't know if that means that they, padded the wall, soundproofed the. I don't know.
Yeah,
We don't have the
goodness knows what that
details yet.
means. Yeah.
This is the allegation that's being made by the victims themselves. I don't think they would have made this up. At the very least, what they're saying is that multiple children were abused in this room, and we know that. This is not unusual because, sadly, I've investigated cases even here from Baltimore, and I've interviewed people that I grew up with. And remember one good friend of mine who's out of the religion, and she told me about this man who was a prominent anointed elder in the church that I knew ever since I was a child. He was friends with Fred Franz, and they were the same age. This guy was just a prominent elder. And he moved from family to family. He always lived with families that had children, and he ultimately wound up with this very wealthy family just a few miles from where I live. And as she described it, he's long since dead now and can be named. His name was Charlie Brineschultz. But she said that Charlie had his own pedophile wing in that house. And another victim came to me and said, absolutely, that was true. And it even happened after the book study that they had, which was a congregation meeting at the home, where he would take victims into his bedroom. So what we're seeing in Montana is not surprising to me, that if there's opportunity and motive and a sick sexual perversion of pedophilia or whatever you want to call it, then the opportunity lends itself to this kind of activity, particularly in an insular organization, but in a remote area, a semi-remote area like Hardin, Montana, which is somewhat disconnected from the big cities like, New York or even Billings, Montana. It's
just
shocking.
chilling. It's chilling, and just for the sake of making this abundantly clear, because I'm aware that there might be witnesses watching who are perhaps they're very anxious about the way Watchtower has handled or mishandled this. But they're also saying, perhaps, well, you're always going to have monsters like this in any kind of religion. Yes, perhaps the organization can do better, but what are you going to do, sort of thing. And one of the points that I think it's really important to stress is that when we're talking about these acts of depravity, to the point where houses are being built to accommodate this evil, let's build it into our ground plan of our new house, a torture room for children. The way Watchtower interprets this is as a sin. And when we're talking about sin, we're talking about things that you can repent of or be sorry for. So you can, according to Watchtower theology, sink to this level of depravity. And conceivably, we don't know what happened with these monsters. I'm hoping that will come out further, as we follow this story, right, and as the case progresses. But you can conceivably do all this, and if you can convince your elders that it's behind you, that it's in the past, and that you're sorry, come back. You're a Jehovah's Witness in good standing, and actually, your victims need to forgive you. That's the problem that we have, among many problems, I might add, when you treat this as a sin, first and foremost, and only a crime by coincidence.
And you're absolutely right. I'm really glad you made that point, Lloyd. And I want to stress this. So, by playing Watchtower's devil's advocate here, the argument that Watchtower and other religions make as to why you can't just report, you just can't carte blanche let these elders pick up the phone and call the police, is that their argument is that you are ruining the opportunity for pedophiles or child abusers or domestic abusers or any of these people who have confessions that they wish to make. You're ruining their chance for them to come to the elders in a safe, trusting, clergy penitent environment and reveal to them what's in their heart and receive forgiveness, and they read scriptures to them. That is the argument that these religions are making, is that you just can't let these elders go to the police because you're taking away their First Amendment rights for religions to operate independently of the state or whatever country that they exist in. And this is the problem that we have with religion. And this is why, they've been fighting this battle. It's why Watchtower is fighting that same battle in the topic of, for example, disfellowshipping and shunning. They're saying we have the religious right to do so because that we are separate from the state, and the state cannot interfere in the right and duly appointed practices of the faith. That is our right. And I'm sure you've seen that in studying with the ICSA investigation and also what's going on in Europe right now.
Well, let's have a bit of relief from this horror story. It is a horror story, isn't it? I mean, I think most horror films would struggle to keep up with this scale of evil. So what have you got for us? Let's first of all, how do we introduce this?
This is going to be a bit of a rough transition, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not a smooth segue, I'm afraid. But let's cue the music.
Okay, everybody. So, welcome back. So we've got a number of news articles to go through today. The first is it continues the theme we were talking about, but it's actually good news because it conveys a legal victory. This is a ruling that's recently been given in the Netherlands regarding whether or not the Jehovah's Witnesses can use, as we were discussing, clergy penitent privilege to avoid giving testimony at trials. Now, to give a little background, if people have been following the work of Reclaimed Voices, you'll be aware that that organization has been working with child abuse victims in the Jehovah's Witness community to get government investigations and legal attention given to what Watchtower has been doing with its child abuse cover-ups. One of the things this has resulted in was actually a raid on the branch to try and obtain information. And I don't think it's come completely clear yet as to which specific cases are being prosecuted, but the prosecutors were looking for information that the Jehovah's Witnesses had about serious crimes that had not been passed to the police.
If I could just interject and do a very cheap plug for my Reclaimed Voices documentary, which explains what Reclaimed Voices are doing and also includes the story of the raid on the branch. So if you want a bit of background, that's where you'll find it.
And also, they, correct me if I'm wrong, they not only raided the branch in Emmen in the Netherlands, but also several kingdom halls.
Kingdom halls, yeah.
And one of the things that came out of this was the Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the things that the government said is that it's not necessarily that this is to prosecute some elders, but this was because some elders may have information that will help a case. And then this became a whole thing about Watchtower essentially refusing to provide these elders and saying they have clergy penitent privilege. Well, a judge has affirmed in the Netherlands that Jehovah's Witness elders cannot claim clergy penitent privilege to avoid testifying for two reasons. One, the information when it's submitted to the elders by an abuser is not done to get kind of spiritual confession and therapy, which is the usual kind of scenario for confession. It's a kind of like, confess, we'll help you, we'll forgive your sins. It's part of a judicial committee. It's part of an internal Jehovah's Witness court system where a person is being interrogated for information. And so the judge took the view that you're not there to be spiritual counselors. You're there as part of essentially your own internal police force collecting evidence. So clergy penitent privilege doesn't apply. And also the additional point was given that it's not just kept with the one priest. That's kind of the other thing. When most people think of clergy penitent privilege, they think of the seal of confession as one sinner, one priest. The sin is discussed and it never goes outside the seal of confession. Whereas we all know Watchtower, the information goes to all the other elders, the information goes in an envelope, it goes to Watchtower, it might go to circuit overseers. So this information gets distributed all through the Watchtower hierarchy. And those were the two reasons where the judge has ruled that Watchtower cannot refuse to provide the JW elders for testimony in upcoming cases, which seems to me like there are cases in the pipeline that are being prepared right now. So this is going to be one to watch. I mean, the Watchtower, as from what I understand, may appeal it. I think legally they can appeal it, but it seems to be that at this first hurdle anyway, that defense that's so often thrown up by Watchtower, which ironically is a defense. If you ask most Jehovah's Witnesses, do you have a confessional and clergy penitent privilege? They'd probably say no, because they've never thought of it in those terms before. But this defense that Watchtower often specifically employs to not having to avoid having to turn over child abuse in information to a police case, that's fallen at the first hurdle in the Netherlands.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, frankly, any country should have the right to bust down the doors at facilities where secret records are being kept on criminal activity. It should be happening in every country. So let's hope that what's happening in the Netherlands and, cases like this legitimizing what is already morally correct action being taken by the government. Let's hope that this perpetuates more similar actions in other countries.
Yeah, I've reminded our audience before about what happened in the JW versus Watchtower case in California, where they didn't fall victim to the same issues that Montana fell victim to, in that in the JW versus Watchtower case, you had a young, multiple children that were abused, and the elders didn't want to testify. They said, well, this is clergy penitent privilege. They basically tried to prevent this known child abuser, this admitted child abuser, from going to prison because they said this is clergy privilege. So I've mentioned it before, but Prosecutor Burke Strunsky went in and he actually proved, using Watchtower's own manuals, the elders manual, that the elders would give up personal information about a case to an appeals committee if an appeals committee got involved in a judicial matter involving child abuse. So the judge looked at that and said, hey, wait a minute, this is absolutely not privilege. This is your, as Covert pointed out, this is your judicial committee proceedings. It is not pastoral counseling. It does not fall under pastoral counseling. So those are two different things. Watchtower says they're all the same. They got away with it in Montana by this much because the Montana Supreme Court felt, well, what are we going to do? The way the language is written, we kind of have to let Watchtower say their rules are different from other churches, but you can't discriminate against us just because we have 12 elders and a huge service department in New York and a legal department. You can't discriminate against us because we don't have a single clergy and priest and a penitent person coming forward to confess. So it's a battleground in the United States right now and in Europe, and so glad that what's going on in the Netherlands. I think that's going to set a precedent for other European countries.
Actually, Covert, can I just ask Mark two questions real quick? Because I don't think we've covered this on Watchtower in Focus, Mark. Am I right in saying that there were similar raids in Brazil? And also, am I right in saying, because we're in quite close contact with Reclaimed Voices,
yes.
was there some suggestion that Shane Brady surfaced in Zwolle in the Netherlands to represent this case?
I guess he is a Canadian Jehovah's Witness lawyer that's been popping up all over the place. He's popped up in, obviously the ICSA investigation, the Netherlands situation, which they've basically just lost that battle unless they can win on appeal. But to answer your other question, yes, Brazil is now experiencing a very large-scale criminal investigation of Jehovah's Witnesses and have performed their own raids, and that has been covered in the Brazilian press, and we haven't done an article yet about it. We're kind of in the early stages of it with JW Survey, but I will say this. We are working behind the scenes on Brazil because there is a major situation there with child abuse and the cover-up, and we've uncovered documents proving that, and the police are in the police have those documents. But without saying a whole lot much more, remember that Brazil, I think, is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, the second largest, unless it's Mexico.
Oh, it's right up there in terms of JW population.
Yes.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's a big problem.
So look out for a future Watchtower in Focus on Brazil.
Yep.
Sorry for sorry for going off on a tangent there.
You're welcome, dude. I think it's interesting as well. It really does feel like there's a bit of a dominoes falling across the world over the last few years. Like police forces and governments have suddenly kind of woken up and said, like, hey, wait, these Jehovah's Witnesses are doing what now? It does feel like, we're kind of, hopefully this is just the first of much more to come. So yeah, watch this space. So the second piece of news we're going to deal with is also legal. If you're familiar with the Palmer leaks that Mark mentioned earlier, you might be aware of the Faithleaks website. It's an organization that was set up to allow essentially whistleblowers to distribute incriminating information that religious organizations might want to keep quiet, such as the Palmer leaks. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I believe the Palmer leaks were made public in association with Faithleaks or the organizations connected to it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they, the gentlemen that operate Faithleaks,
we've had them on the show, haven't we? For the Palmer Leaks episode,
yeah.
We had them on the show. Yeah,
right. So that was Ethan and Ryan. So now they're being sued by Watchtower. That's the short story. But yeah, they started Mormon leaks, and then they expanded to other religions, including Jehovah's Witnesses, because a lot of documents had been leaked. They redacted all of these documents with regards to the Palmer congregation and other congregations in the northeastern United States. But then, Watchtower went after the Avoid JW website, and when the documents disappeared from Avoid JW because of Watchtower's legal threats, then they resurfaced on Faithleaks, and Watchtower is now suing Faithleaks for that.
So, I mean, as you can see, what Faithleaks have probably been on Watchtower's radar for quite some time. What's interesting is that Watchtower is now suing Faithleaks with a copyright claim. And the copyright claim relates to 72 convention videos that are hosted on the site. If you look at the Faithleaks site, I don't know if they're still up there, but they've got all of the videos that were shown at one of the conventions are posted on the site. And Watchtower has announced that they're suing the site. There's an article on Torrent Freak, which I don't know if we can link in the video, but it goes into a lot more detail. But Watchtower is one of the strange things is they're suing for loss of earnings or loss of revenue. And
it's not a money-making scheme, except when it is for litigious reasons. Yeah,
because I'd be fascinated to see Watchtower prove in court how they make money off these videos.
Yeah,
but I mean, there's background to this. I mean, it's not just the fact that Faithleaks have published material that was damning to Watchtower in the past. As we know, Watchtower has been issuing copyright claims against people. Over 60 DMCA takedowns. I mean, the subpoena war video, you covered it.
Yeah, just to be clear, these are subpoenas for information that may or may not be used to pursue copyright claims against the individual. So so this is the thing. The suspicion has been long, but Watchtower isn't really interested in suing these people for copyright. They just want their names, so they just want to terrify them, basically.
Exactly, or disfellowship them and take their family away.
Yeah.
Now, the latest subpoena they brought before a judge, the defendant actually made the point that Watchtower has issued over 60 subpoenas but never sued anyone. And this is proof that they're not really interested in suing people. They just want their people's names. The judge actually listened to this and then actually challenged Watchtower to prove where they'd ever actually sued anyone. Now, hot on the heels of that challenge comes this lawsuit, which is interesting, but is also, if Watchtower are trying to prove that, oh, here's someone we're suing, well, the identity of the Faithleaks team's been on the Watchtower's radar for years because they're very open about who they are. So I don't see how this helps Watchtower in the.
It's not remotely connected. Yeah.
But there was a very good video that was done by a YouTube lawyer, Leonard French, who we've had on the show as well. We've had
Leonard's just brilliant, isn't he?
He's
what a fan! Cool. I'm so glad he exists. You know, the world needs more YouTube lawyers who will make more videos about Watchtower's copyright legal shambles than we do. I mean, he goes into this in far more detail over on his channel than we've been able to. So
yeah, I mean, he's a fantastic resource,
and he has funny hats.
He has amazing
fantastic hats, yeah,
and 2 very nice dogs actually. Mark has his cats and Leonard has his dogs. But his video actually is quite good. I'd recommend.
I have a dog.
Oh, you have a Snoopy.
Yeah, the dog.
Oh, he's cute. So Leonard's basically, I won't sort of go through his video in detail. I would recommend anyone go and watch it. He goes through the things that Faithleaks have got legally in their favor, and also some of the areas that they might have to like mount quite a strong defense on. It's actually, I think also if you're planning to post anything relating to Watchtower in similar terms, it's probably not a good idea to watch that, because you'll get a good idea of how to fireproof yourself about what Watchtower might try and do to you. And since we clearly see Watchtower is now clearly wanting to become more like Scientology and going after its critics. So I think it does behooves well any organization who's looking to do activism to make sure they're legally fireproofed, because Watchtower is clearly getting more vicious. We don't know anything more about this case yet, but we'll bring updates as they come.
Indeed.
I'd like to point out, that they are being forced to take certain action. When I say forced, they feel compelled to take this legal action, because with YouTube it's different. So obviously, Lloyd, you and I were doing a video not that long ago,
which crippled my ability to do live streams. Yeah,
exactly. So this was just, we were discussing. We got 90 minutes into sharing this video and discussing it, and Watchtower made a phone call or whatever, sent a notification, and YouTube just shut it down. So here's the issue. So that's fine. So Watchtower knows how to go after YouTube and silence the critics immediately, or anything they consider copyrighted work that's not commentary. They can do that. But here's where they're having a problem, is that these documents that are apparently, or these videos posted by the Faithleaks folks have been allegedly posted in full, like these 70-some videos, and they're not hosted on YouTube. These are hosted in, somewhere outside of the United States that Watchtower cannot get to them. So the only way that they can, go, and I think they're still up there because they can't touch them. The only way they can do this now is by filing a lawsuit. And that's why you're reading this news about Watchtower filing a lawsuit against these people, because they're doing everything possible to stop the leak of these free videos that they produced with volunteer labor that is completely unpaid for allegedly religious purposes. And none of these people that have produced these videos get any kind of health insurance, any kind of benefits. This reminds me of, I was just reviewing this crazy Tony Alamo case, this cult leader down in Arkansas, and our good friend Neil Smith was involved in the takedown of that cult and the organization. But this man had multiple businesses, and he had people working for him. The IRS went after him, took away his tax exemption, but he had all these people working for him. They were turning over their paychecks. These people were, I'm not comparing the JWs exactly to what was going on with Tony Alamo, but these people were just not getting compensated. So Jehovah's Witnesses that go to Bethel, they sign over they basically sign over all their rights to getting any kind of compensation. They're obviously not paid, but there's no Social Security benefits or health benefits other than they have some internal, for lifetime Bethelites, they have some internal health care. Anyway, that's another topic in itself, but free videos, made by volunteers that now Watchtower is going after Faithleaks because they're just sitting out there on the website. They're not even, these guys aren't even ex-witnesses.
But basically, Watchtower doesn't know how to cope with the internet. And, and their solution is, we're going to try and rewrite the rules of what you can and can't do in the information age. And we're going to try and use copyright law to make it so that no one gets to distribute free material that we've created unless it's with the spin we choose to put on it. That's
and the fascinating thing with this is, I mean, I don't know how this works from a legal perspective, and Leonard actually dissects this at detail. But from a spiritual perspective, surely if these videos are posted unaltered, they're just pure spiritual truth. And Watchtower should be overjoyed that more people will see these videos.
Indeed.
And so, you know, clearly, if people were just posting unaltered sections of the Bible up for people to view, why is it a problem if people read, you know, sections of the Bible that are unaltered? So it's very telling to see what happens when the way Watchtower reacts when people post unedited, completely straight from the horse's mouth, as these videos are. And as Leonard said, that could work against them, possibly legally, depending. There are arguments for it, but everyone acknowledges these videos have not been altered. Surely Watchtower should be happy with that, because more people might get to watch these videos of pure spiritual truth. And the fact that they're not happy...
Ironically, Watchtower would have less of an argument if the material had been posted with before and after criticism of the material. That would have put Watchtower in a worse situation. But because there is zero criticism of the material, it's just, here's the material, watch it for yourself and draw your own conclusions, then Watchtower has grounds to go after them. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, the one argument that they're trying to make, and it's one of the few arguments that they feel they can stand on, is the fact that they're claiming that it's a fact that the Truth and Transparency Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Okay, so they're just like Watchtower. They're a nonprofit. They're not a religion, but they're a nonprofit. But the claim is that because Truth and Transparency had a donate button, and people can donate if you want to give $10 to the Truth and Transparency to help pay for their internet fees, or what, you know, I know they spend a lot of money in hosting fees. It's not cheap. So their Watchtower's claim is that, you know, they're collecting money so that they can post our videos, even though the counter argument is that they post everything about Mormons, about Jehovah's Witnesses, about everyone. So I don't know how this is going to play out in court, but that is one of their arguments that and they went after Peter Mosier when he had his watchtower.ca website, which he owned. Watchtower sued him. I think they threatened him with a $150,000 lawsuit unless he took his website down and all the apostate material on it. And they basically got him by saying, you know, you had some PayPal donation button on your website. So, you know, you're making money off of our materials. That's their claim.
Yeah.
Anywho,
I guess we'll see how that one plays out.
Yeah.
And we'll bring you updates as they come. So the third out of four headlines, this is a bit of a reach back into 2014. And I think we actually covered this at JW's survey. And I remember, Lloyd, you made a few videos about this. In 2014, there was a UK Jehovah's Witness couple, the Kings, Naghmeh and Brett King. They sparked an international manhunt after they took their son, Aisha, I think I said that correctly, Aisha, who had brain cancer. They took him out of a UK hospital against doctors' advice and took him abroad to get different treatment for his cancer. And at the time, it was a big thing because initially, I think a lot of XJWs thought, "Oh, is this something to do with the blood thing?" Because it made all the news.
I thought it was, and actually, one of the reasons I remember it so well is because it was a big learning experience for me, and it kind of served to hone my journalistic skills. Because to begin with, I was saying, because I wasn't doing videos on this stuff back then, it was only blog articles, and I was jumping up and down saying, I'm sorry, you're not telling me this isn't to do with blood. You know, this has all the hallmarks of parents who are determined to pull their child out because the hospital staff refused to give a blood transfusion and refused to treat without blood. And I actually ended up publishing a retraction on my article and apologizing for jumping to that conclusion. So it's fascinating 6 years later to revisit this story. Yeah.
Because it appears that first of all, Aisha's now 10 and he's made an amazing recovery apparently. So that's good. That's a really good outcome. Because at the time I remember his health was really under threat and it didn't look good for him. So that's some really good news that's come out of this. But Naghmeh, or Naghmeh, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, has appeared in an article in the British Sun newspaper saying that she's left Brett She no longer appears to be a Jehovah's Witness. She's currently in Spain in self-isolation, and she's trying to get Aisha to come out to stay with her. But she basically, the implication of the article is either that she's no longer a believing Jehovah's Witness, or that she's PMO, she's physically out, mentally in. But honestly, I'll say from some of the things she says in this article, and the article's all about where is she now and this split between the parents. She says that the Jehovah's Witnesses were branding coronavirus an Armageddon. She complains that my kids are at home and terrified that this is Armageddon whilst I'm stuck here in Spain. She also implies that this kind of constant thread about Armageddon, and she says, where's the quote? I'm just scrolling down the website. There we go. I couldn't deal with it. I came out at the beginning of March. The Jehovah's Witnesses say coronavirus is the great plague prophesied by God, and they will only be saved if their belief in Jehovah is strong enough. Brett said he didn't want me to leave the house, but I couldn't take it anymore. I'm definitely happier now I've left. I feel free and I've got more time to think and study. And then she goes on to say, now I just want my children back. I want them to come over and live with me here in Spain, and I've been looking at bigger homes to rent. So, I mean, obviously, the marriage breaking up is always stressful. Custody battles are stressful. But it's interesting, I think, especially to revisit, since this was such a prominent JW couple in the news 6 years ago, it's interesting to see now that one of them appears to have left. And also her comments about the current mentality inside the Jehovah's Witnesses that she knows, and the congregation that she's aware of, is that, they're in Armageddon fever about coronavirus.
Yeah, well, obviously, to a degree, as we discussed in our last episode, to a degree, there were some very unfortunate statements put out by the leaders themselves in the early days of the crisis, which, to a degree, the organisation's been backpedaling from. But on a congregation level, you can imagine that there's far less inhibition about attaching apocalyptic significance to the pandemic. I just find it fascinating that kind of a high-profile Jehovah's Witness, at least as far as the UK media is concerned, is now apparently out. It goes without saying that if she wants to come on the channel and tell her side of things, I'd be delighted to hear from her. But it's also in a way encouraging, because if someone like Naghmeh King can wake up despite having, been attached so prominently with the religion, then surely almost anyone can wake up.
Yeah, and so they're hoping that's hoping that's the start of hopefully even more, maybe more waking up in the family. But again, if more news comes, we'll let you know. And like you say, Lloyd, it looks like she's got an invite to contact you if she wants
definitely.
to tell her side of this.
Because
it does seem like there's probably more to that story than there's in the Sun newspaper. I feel there's probably quite a story to tell there. So, yeah.
Well done.
So, the last piece of news we have, and this is absolutely unqualified good news. Cliff Henderson, who's probably better known to the XJW community as XJW Fifth, and I know you've had him on the show quite a few times.
Numerous times, yeah. Part of the furniture on the John Sears channel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, he is also a rapper, hip-hop artist. With the musical name is Fifth, so we know him as XJW Fifth, but his hip-hop name is Fifth. He has his debut EP out on iTunes, Spotify, and all other good music stores and streaming services. The EP is called 1 Years Old. It's got 7 tracks on it, including kind of the debut track, which I think a lot of people may have already heard, Costa Doing Business, it's a great track in its own right, but you listen to it and he sort of said it's about his experience leaving the JWs. And if that resonated from you, listen to the other tracks on the EP, because there's a recurring theme there of the experience of being an XJW, what that's like, coming through his journey, the emotional experience. It's a great album, not only because it's, if you're an XJW, it will resonate with you, but also it's really good hip hop. I mean, Cliff, you are good at this. Please keep making music. That I was playing it to somebody, and I didn't tell them it was by Fifth. He's an XJW. I was just playing it, and they just thought I had the radio on. Because he's effortlessly making top quality music, and I think this is the start of an awesome music career. And we all get to say we knew him before he was cool.
Usually, if your mate says to you, "I've written a few songs," I've got an album in the works. Do you want to listen to it? And usually you'd be like, yeah, you know. I can remember being in the car with Cliff and Javier and Juan driving across the California desert on one of our filming shoots for The Truth About the Truth, and hearing for the first time chat in the car that Cliff had songs that he was working on. And so I kind of like skeptically said, yeah, go on, I'll have a look. I'm sure it's fantastic. You know, I kind of had a listen and thought, oh.
You were thinking David Brent, maybe?
That's exactly what I was, because I'll be honest, I've got an album, but I'll never release it because of David Brent and because of Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais just lampoons that whole concept, but then you listen to what Cliff has achieved, and it is a true achievement. It is a true artistic achievement.
Yeah.
And I can just remember listening to the first kind of sample. It was just a rough demo, and I thought, this guy can rap. This guy can absolutely rap. And it's got a very kind of distinctive old school. I mean, I'm no connoisseur of rap by any means, but it has like an old school feel to it, which I can immediately connect with. So,
and it shouldn't be lost on our audience that Cliff's work only became really, he only flourished after he left.
I thought you were going to say under my tutelage.
Well, that's true also. I taught him in the streets of London or wherever it was.
Yeah.
No, it's to see the JWs flourish. I mean, that was a great story that Covert read about the woman, and she's now free from the religion, and hopefully free. And now, but Cliff, man, his stuff was great before it was professionally produced.
Yeah, it was actually
well done.
Yeah. And that's just great. And it just shows you how there are so many talented artists amongst the JWs who never get to explore that side of their personality. So it's awesome to see someone leave and embrace it and kind of do so well. So yeah, people, track down that EP, 1 year old. You can search for either 1 year old, or you can search for Fifth as the artist. Spotify, iTunes, all the streaming services, all the places you get your music. Check it out. You won't regret it.
And don't be one of these like, oh, I'll only listen to it if it's free, because some proper work's gone into this.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to kind of reimburse Cliff for some of that artistic work and creative energy he's poured into this project. So
put it this way, if you walk down the street and think, I think I'll treat myself to a Starbucks, and you do that just once or twice a week, skip the Starbucks, assuming this isn't lockdown, and go buy the album instead. It's not expensive. It's really reasonably priced. Go pick it up. Support artists, especially when they come from the XJW community and they're kicking ass. And to be honest, you wouldn't even need to know he's an XJW. It's just a good album. It's just a really good album. Go buy it.
Brilliant. So from that positivity, we return to our feature story. What more to say? Well, let's do our summary comments, shall we? And because Covert's just been kicking ass and taking names with the news,
we'll give him a break.
Let's give Covert a little bit of a break. And Mark, how can you? What for those watching this video? What should be the take-home bits of information about this story?
Yeah, so I want to put it all in perspective. And as you pointed out earlier, we have some Jehovah's Witnesses that may be watching. In fact, I know for a fact that is the case. And they do watch the channel closely, and some are in the process of waking up. So a lot of this is kind of disturbing to them. And as you pointed out also, many initially have the impression that it's just a few bad apples here and there. But when we do this consistently month in and month out we've done this program now for 3 years, and we've just had no shortage of child abuse cases, starting with the Philadelphia trial involving Watchtower and the Stephanie Fessler. We've been, what are we now on 37 episodes, and so many of them have been about child abuse. We're shaking the bad apples, and It's not one or two that are falling from the tree. It's all over the world, every country, every state in the US. It's keeping me busy on a full-time basis, just investigating and working with attorneys and doing these programs to try to raise awareness of it. I mean, literally just I think just yesterday, one of my former congregation members who's out of the religion now posted on Facebook, and an apologist came on and said, well, I had a pretty good life as a JW. My parents, and these are all friends of mine, but he said, my parents are, treated me well. And, but, he forgets to mention that he was never baptized and he's never dealt with shunning, never dealt with child abuse, never dealt with the blood issue. And the majority of kids that I grew up with had some connection to all of those things, whether it was abuse or many I knew died from having accidents and couldn't take blood, and it's endless. So you do have a few people that are sort of apologists for the religion, but we're not here to necessarily attack religion. We're here to bring out the news of these cases, let people decide what they want. The two cases in Montana, look, they're happening now because previously none of these victims were able to get any justice because number one, they couldn't tell their story. They might have been trapped by the religion. Now they're able to come forward, tell their story, and they may be able to get some kind of compensation in these civil cases. But we do want to penalize those organizations, all organizations that endanger children. We have to have these civil cases because if we don't have them, then religion like Watchtower can just run amok and they can make any decisions about anyone. They can disfellowship whoever they want. They can cover over child abuse as much as they want. We have to have a pushback. That's what makes our democratic societies great. We have these judicial systems that help balance right and wrong, and we need it. I'd like to read a paragraph. I don't want to go into the graphic details. I just want to read one paragraph of what this former elder, James Rowland, said about his daughter's case. And it's item number 4 in his deposition or his affidavit. He said, in the late 1970s, I heard rumors from church members that Elder Harold Rimby, Bruce Mapley Sr., as well as Martin Svensson himself were sexually abusing children in the congregation. In early 1984, our congregation was visited by a substitute overseer whose name I can't recall. One day at the Kingdom Hall in Hardin, Montana, I tried to tell the visiting overseer about the problems with child molestation and sexual abuse that we had within the congregation in general and specifically as it pertained to Martin Svensson and Gunnar Hain. Upon hearing what I said, the overseer jumped up out of his chair, walked up to me, and told me in a very angry voice never to ever mention the subject of pedophilia again. No further action was taken about my complaints. A few months later, we had another visiting overseer by the name of Milneck. During an elders meeting, I brought up to him the problem of pedophilia on the part of elders in the congregation, including Martin Svensson, and he too yelled at me and instructed me never to mention that word in connection with Martin Svensson again. No further action was taken on the part of the church. I wish I had time to read all of this, but we don't. And I wish I could tell everybody I'm going to publish these documents right away, but I can't. There's too many names of victims. Please be patient with us. The documents will be published. The press is just beginning to cover these stories. I think a Hardin, Montana local paper did cover the first case. I haven't seen anything on the second one yet. This is going to be in the news. It's going to be developing. Please be patient with us. But those who are perhaps active witnesses watching, we're not upset with you. We want you to know that there is a massive cover-up of child sexual abuse and other matters within the Jehovah's Witness organization, and your local elders may not know about it because they're only being fed the information that the circuit overseer and the service department for Watchtower and the legal department give them. They only have the rule book, the elder's handbook that all of us now have. They can't possibly know of the extent of the child abuse problem. They can't go to an elders KM school and raise their hand and say, brother circuit overseer, can you tell us the extent of the problem? They're not honest about that. They never will be because it brings reproach upon Jehovah's name. These cases are extensive. They're global. they're an epidemic and they violate the law. These are crimes that need to be reported. Let the police handle the crimes and let the congregation and the church handle their spiritual matters, but do not step in the line of the police when it comes to handling child sexual abuse. We need to protect children. So that's it. If anyone has questions, reach out to us. If they need support at jwsurvey.org, and you'll get a lot of support there from our team. And you can also, send us any tips, or if you know of abuse, contact the police first, contact the authorities. If you're aware of a situation, find out where it happened, contact the authorities. And we're going to continue reporting on this, and hopefully we'll have an article up soon on these cases, and we'll let you know how they develop.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the incredible work that you're doing behind the scenes, not just on this case, but on many other cases. It's thankless work, and it's soul-eroding work, safe to say, but you're really committed to it, and I take my hat off to you. Just when you were describing those exchanges with two different circuit overseers, it almost gave me flashbacks to when I was an elder, because it sounds like what you're describing is an elder's meeting with the circuit overseer during a circuit overseer's visit. And I've been in many of those meetings, the majority of times as a ministerial servant, but I've also been in a few, maybe I think one or two, during my time as an elder. And I'm just imagining how crazy the atmosphere must have been for this elder Roland to have got up at one of these meetings in front of the very people he's referring to, and said in front of them to the circuit overseer, "We've got a problem with pedophilia in this congregation involving these men who I'm sat next to and who I'm shepherding the congregation with." And for the circuit overseer to say, effectively, "Shut your mouth," And I can only imagine what the atmosphere must have been like on that body of elders.
Yeah.
It must have been a crazy atmosphere for this to have been happening with the knowledge of this Mr. Rowland for over a period of years. If we're talking about two different circuit overseers visits, we're talking about a situation where there was unrest on the elder body for a significant period of time on a matter such as this. I don't even want to think about what it must have been like in that congregation. If that was the what was happening at elder level, goodness knows how that would have translated into the congregation. Because usually, if there's unrest on the elder body, it filters down in some way to the congregation. So goodness knows what it was like.
A lot of these elders' self-worth is tied up in their position. And as you grow in the Jehovah's Witness organization, if you don't become a ministerial servant by a certain year, as Tony Morris likes to point out, you're deficient, and then you need to grow and become an elder. So these elders who know about this abuse, I really feel for them. I really do, because many of them are dealing with a terrible crisis of conscience because they know that they need to go to the police about these matters, but they're being told not to. If they break, we have evidence of elders being removed all the time for breaking Watchtower's advice or policy instructions to keep matters internal, keep them quiet, use clergy penitent confidentiality. Don't tell the judge, don't do a deposition because you have clergy penitent confidentiality in this particular case. It's got to weigh on them so heavily that this man, James Rowland, is an example of many that I've spoken to and interviewed that have come forward and said, I just couldn't take it anymore. And Watchtower is telling them to destroy documents. And
you've sat in circuit overseers meetings with elders and servants.
Yes.
You know what that is like in that room.
Many times.
Can you imagine what that exchange would have been like to just behold as like a fly on the wall? It would have been absolutely outrageous.
Oh, I remember, just ministerial servants raising their hand, asking simple questions and being, shot down just the tension in the room, because you have that fear of not only going up against your local elders, but against the Jehovah's Witnesses branch, governing body appointed representative, the circuit overseer, who holds the power to delete you or appoint you. And his word, and the elders won't go against that. What he does, what he says is going to be followed. So these elders are in a terrible position. I do feel for them. And, you got to do the right thing. Doing the right thing is a hard thing to do. You may lose your position. You may be kicked out of the organization. You may lose your family. It's a terribly difficult decision. Ultimately, it's a decision I had to make. And they came after me, 5 years after I had been investigating child abuse cases, and finally spoke to the Atlantic, and they disfellowshipped my wife and me for our role in helping people to wake up. And I think that in itself should help people to wake up.
So, Covert, with all of this in consideration, what do you think should be the take-home message for anyone watching this episode?
So I think, continuing the theme of speaking to those Jehovah's Witnesses who may be watching, and I was a Jehovah's Witness for over 30 years, so I totally get how this feels. I'm one of those ex-JWs. I have no problem with people wanting to be Jehovah's Witnesses. I think you should be able to practice your religion. I think you are entitled to the same human rights as everybody else. And my mission here is not to turn everyone. My mission is just to give everyone the facts, and then people can do what they want with them. When it comes to the argument of a clergy penitent privilege, I suspect you didn't even know that Watchtower made that argument, because that's something the clergy do. And you've probably never heard the theory that elders would refuse to help the police on the grounds of clergy penitent privilege until you've heard this in the context of child abuse. There's a scripture which says, "Pay back Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God." And that was a command from Jesus. Now, you might say, well, God's things are the sin. Jehovah's Witnesses deal with the sin. And that's fair enough. I have no problem with Jehovah's Witnesses elders dealing with the sin if they want to. That's fine. As long as they're doing it from as long as the child abuser is dealing with their sin from a federal prison. Because that's the other aspect, is pay back Caesar's things to Caesar. Jehovah God, if you accept the Jehovah's Witness view of the world, has appointed the nations to enforce the laws and punish crime. And when somebody abuses a child, that is both a sin and a crime. Caesar's laws have a right to that abuser. And if the elders are not turning that abuser over to the authorities, they're actually cheating Caesar of the role over which Jehovah God, in the Jehovah's Witness worldview, has appointed them. There's no reason why elders can't simultaneously deal with the sin and hand the abuser over to the authorities for the crime to be punished. So is there any reason why Jehovah's Witness elders can't instantly report the abuser to the police, as well as starting their own deep process of dealing with the sin? If the reply is, well, then an abuser might not come to the elders if he thinks he might get reported to the police, well, he's not really repentant then, is he? If he's not really repentant, and the Bible actually has a number of examples of people who claimed they were repentant but tried to get out of punishment. Well, as far as I'm aware, from my understanding as a Jehovah's Witness, trying to escape the punishment for a sin meant you weren't really repentant in the first place. The only reason that David was spared in the biblical account after he committed adultery and had Bathsheba's husband killed was that he was genuinely repentant. And he still had to accept the punishment. So if you're a JW listening to this and thinking, well, the problem is that the elders can't turn the abusers over to the authorities, because then that person might not turn themselves in the first place. Well, that means the person isn't really repentant. But from the point of view of a Jehovah's Witness, surely it's imperative to follow Jesus' command and pay back Caesar's things to Caesar, as well as paying back God's things to God. And that's just a thought. I think I'd leave it on.
Thank you. Very well said. I don't have too much to add. I think I've ranted quite enough on this episode. I do just want to reiterate that, as we said at the beginning of this episode, we are in no way suggesting that the Hardin Ring was organised or in any way encouraged or endorsed by Watchtower. We're not suggesting that. What we are, however, pointing out, as it seems blatantly obvious, is that the Hardin Ring was made possible due to, first of all, Watchtower's cover-up of child sex abuse. And we've learned that circuit overseers were aware of what was happening. They not only failed to do anything about it, they actively played a part in keeping the information under the rug. So we know that Watchtower was involved in that sense, but also it's the power that these men have that enables such a thing as a pedophile ring to exist. Once you have positions in a congregation where power isn't to be questioned, where someone's power is associated with an organization that's backed by God himself, it makes it so much easier for this sort of thing to happen, which is why I'm not surprised to learn that the similar things may have happened in Massachusetts, and goodness knows where else there may be rings of this type that we just haven't heard of yet. So let's just focus on that as well, that it's the power that the organization gives these men that enables this sort of thing to happen, where you can have such a thing as a pedophile ring in Jehovah's organization. And I also want to point out what should be glaringly obvious, which is that you're not going to hear about this on jw.org. You're not going to hear about this on JW Broadcasting. They'll be quick to tell you their success stories. They'll be quick to tell you their tear-jerking personal testimonies, but they will never, ever tell you what happened in Hardin. You're only going to find out about that through the legal process, through the court proceedings, through the news media, and through what we're doing here and on JW Survey. I'm proud to be working with Mark, with Covert, with the rest of the team, doing what we can to shine a light on this. But let's be clear, you are never going to hear about this from Watchtower. And that's our show. So all that remains after my lengthy rant is to again thank Covert and Mark for joining me. We've dealt with some very difficult subject matter, but hopefully we've at least highlighted the main issues that witnesses and non-witnesses and ex-witnesses need to be aware of.
Well said, Lloyd. I think that this is flushing out a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, not only from ex-witnesses, but from witnesses themselves who are just beginning to learn about what's going on. And Watchtower can only kind of hold back the dam so long before it breaks loose and enough people realize that these are not apostate lies, that this is reality. It's sad, but it's today's reality. And then they have to start to examine whether what they were told since they were children is accurate, that this is Jehovah's clean organization. Look, we don't oppose quote unquote good Christian living, or whatever you want to refer to it as. We didn't become ex-witnesses, to practice the kind of quote unquote glaring sins that, we're trying to do the right thing. And I think people know that we're here for the right reasons. And so that becomes obvious eventually to people who read what we're doing. The issue is that they're being prevented from reading apostate material. And it is my hope that enough people will kind of, there's going to be enough bridging of the gap that people will begin to see that, JW Facts, JW Survey, some of the other sites out there that are producing material about, and there's plenty, are doing so out of sincerity, not out of some hidden agenda. We want
I
to
wish
help
we
those.
didn't need to. I wish it was all just there on jw.org, the good, the bad, the ugly. But you're only going to hear one thing on jw.org, and that's good, and that's varnished information that makes the organization look good, you're never ever going to hear, oh, by the way, this happened in Hardin. So I wish we didn't have to cover this story, quite frankly. There are other things I would rather be doing, quite frankly, with my Wednesday evening than talking about this monstrosity. But if we don't cover it, who will? You know?
Well, thanks for making the program available. I think we're going to be at 40 episodes pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Indeed. Well, there's certainly no end of material to work with. But again, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to record this show with me.
You bet, Lloyd. Thanks.
Thanks, Lloyd.
So, viewers, I hope you found this episode interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.
Say